Anna Greenwald, you beautiful human. I am so excited for this time with you today. And we were just laughing and saying, "Oh my God, we have to hit record because we're talking about such good stuff." Welcome, my friend. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and just talk today. I can't wait to hear where this conversation goes.
That's right. Just talk. Do you remember? I always like to start these with how we came into each other's lives because I think there's these beautiful serendipitous moments that happen to us every day if we rise up off of the to-do list and the screen to really lean into it. Do you remember how we came into each other's lives? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the first time that I saw you was at the Power morning meeting at 8 a.m. All of the beautiful women's faces getting on like varying stages of alertness.
And are we masochists at 8 a.m. to get on a video call?
I love it. I love seeing people in work in this remote setting, just in their spaces, in their lives. I think that's actually one of the things that has enabled this human-centered work movement to take root over the pandemic, is that you can't help but just see people exactly where they are. Like how just before this, we were cheersing our coffee mugs and I was putting my earrings in. Like you didn't get those moments before.
I love that. I didn't even think about that. Just me personally, I remember when we started doing, the video calls, and I would be so worried about my background and am I in the right spot and does it look nice and am I ready? And now there's sort of just this like, fuck it. I am what I am. So sometimes I get on the calls without any makeup and I'm like, this is who you get. So it's almost been like putting the mask down.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think it's interesting. I do a lot of work with clients where everyone's in the room from senior leadership all the way through the organization. And there's a certain leveling that happens when everyone has the same size, Zoom camera screen, and, you see the humanity across all of these imagined barriers between team members and humans, right? I always like to say team members or employees, leaders is just funny words for humans.
Oh my God, I love that. Yeah, like when did we forget that Bob Smith, CEO, hey, listen, he's a human. Like
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
I think it's true too that as leaders, and especially holding the different identities that we hold, right? We feel that we need to show up in a certain way. And when your child is screaming and running across the background and you can't help that, it forces us to release some of those things, right? And that feeling of being forced to kind of release and let go, it can be so scary. But when we're all forced to do it all at once as a society, I think it can be really liberating.
Can you share with our listeners the mic drop moment that you and I had before this call where you were talking about unfortunately getting struck by the COVID bug and the motto that it gave you? What was the blessing?
Yeah, it's do your best and forget the rest.
I love that.
And
I love that.
That has been, I think if I heard somebody say that motto 2 years ago, I'd be like, no, okay, like great for you. I have too many things to forget them. But I think, when I got COVID, like so many people, thankfully mine was relatively mild. I was just down and out for a few days, and I couldn't access this whole level of what felt like my personality, right? Like this energy, this thinking, and being forced to let go and being forced to release these things that I thought were only held up because I was holding them. And then releasing those and realizing, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person holding these up. It's actually never been my sole responsibility to hold these things up. That is a reminder I don't think we can get enough times in our life.
I love that. And also too, listen, if I don't get it done, the world isn't going to come crumbling down.
Right.
I was listening, a girlfriend of mine, I'll send it to you after this. She just started her own podcast called Unmute Yourself with Nancy Madoff. And she was talking about how we have this like knee jerk reaction that when our boss or someone from senior level team sends us an email, even if it's over the weekend, that we need to respond to it.
Mm.
And she's like, listen, if being with your kids is important on the weekend, or if you know there is time for you, you don't need to respond. You're not going to get in trouble on Monday morning. Like, how many people have gotten in trouble for not responding on the email on the weekend?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's these extrapolations of all of the potential challenge that's going to happen. And I mean, that goes back to just our human stress response, right? Like our stress response, this adrenaline and cortisol that we feel when we see that email from the boss, right? That is a physical reaction that was designed to protect us from literally being eaten by a tiger, right? So we see the email, our brain processes, uh-oh, this could be a threat, and then floods our body with the same hormones that we need to save ourselves from actually dying. And so it's when you think about it like that, it's like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense that it's so challenging. But I have noticed in my work that I do with clients and myself and my team, even if we know that it doesn't make sense necessarily that we're feeling that intensity of emotion, then we sometimes often accidentally make it worse by turning back in and saying, I shouldn't feel this bad. I shouldn't deal with the stress like this. The stress shouldn't affect me like this. And I think do your best and forget the rest is just that moment of, hey, this is what's happening. And it's actually okay. And it's okay to own that you have less control over the good things and the bad things that you feel like you need to.
Yes. Yes. Speaking of control, have you ever heard of Martha Beck?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, I'm gonna send you. Are you a book reader?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I will say I'm a book listener. I am the
oh,
biggest
you're the list.
Audible fan in the world.
Yep, I get. Hey, listen, I get it, and I think whatever works for you, right? Hey, whatever works for you. So Martha Beck, I've been a huge fan of her content. She's Oprah's life coach, so I'm like, listen, if it works for Oprah Winfrey, hey, it's good enough for me. And in her book, The North Star, she talks about these like 4 stages of life and how something in your mind is horrific, or could be a air quote like life altering event, brings you to your knees. It forces you to almost like rebirth your identity. And I think, God, there's so many times in my life where I was brought to my knees thinking this is the end. I will never make it through this. And what was on the other end was something more beautiful than I could have ever anticipated. And you can never see it in the mess.
Absolutely.
Makes me think of our first conversation together. You were so vulnerable and so authentic in sharing with me your story on how yoga came into your life and how it ultimately became the foundation of building this company and this movement. Can you share that with our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. It's a very funny story. So for a little bit of context for everybody listening, I run a company called On the Goga. We do organizational well-being. So we work with global companies to build wellness programs that center around helping individual employees, leaders feel cared for and supported. And that makes stronger businesses, makes better, more both inclusive, profitable, productive, and enjoyable places to work. So that's the end of the story, right? But you would imagine that that might have a very different beginning than a 12-year-old girl who thought she was going to be the next Christina Aguilera. So that's kind of where it begins. My whole life, I grew up fully obsessed with and committed to the idea that I was going to be a famous singer. So I, have theater background, music background. I studied classical voice actually all up through college. When I went to school, I looked for programs that would teach me not just music, but music business and entrepreneurship, because I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it happen. So I went to school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at Drexel University at their music industry program, spending half my time in entrepreneurship classes and half my time in music production classes. And I recorded my first EP, and I was just singing all the time, and I was having so much fun. And then I woke up one morning and I couldn't talk. And it was because I had gotten a vocal cord injury. And I just woke up without a voice. And I think there's probably a lot of metaphorical kind of experiences that you have in a moment like that. But it was really terrifying, because not only was I losing what felt like a part of my identity, kind of like what you were just saying, Megan, that scary moment where you're like, oh my God, like where do I go from here? This is my whole life, right? And as a 19-year-old, that was really freaky, because that was really one of the first times that had ever happened to me. And, I went to the doctor and they diagnosed me and they gave me this vocal therapy regimen and all this different stuff. And part of it included going to yoga. And I said, absolutely not. There's no way you are getting me in a yoga studio. I hate exercise and I hate hippies. And there's just no way that this combination's going to ever happen. And I really identified at that point in a pretty deep way as someone who was not athletic, as someone who used to play soccer when they were young, right? I had felt like my body wasn't really something that served me. And so the idea of going to a yoga class surrounded by, bendy women in Lululemon was truly terrifying. But the only thing that felt more terrifying was never being able to sing again. And so I went, and I remember the first yoga class I ever took, the girl behind me did a headstand, and I started audibly laughing in the class. Like, I just started laughing because I was like, that's crazy. I'm never, ever going to be able to do that. And yet in that class, I happened to have this amazing teacher who was just really down to earth, super practical, no woo-woo stuff about it. She was just like, hey, like, can you feel the difference between your right hand and your left hand in this pose? When you're breathing, can you notice where your thoughts are? Are they wandering into something else, or are they right here? And something about that for me was really touching. And I was like, wow, this feels almost like familiar to me. And so I got curious, and I kept going back and kept going back. And I became really deeply acquainted with yoga as a mindfulness practice. And it really changed my life. I mean, I started going 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week, to the point that I lived right up the street from the studio. I was there every day, and it changed everything for me. I lost like 40 pounds. I grew up with a lot of medical challenges, these undiagnosed, vague medical issues, and they went away. My allergies went away. And I'm the type of person that's like, all right, I know this isn't hippie yoga magic. Like, what's happening here? And I got really into the research and the science behind mindfulness and yoga, and how these things, these simple practices of being aware of your body and your breath and your thoughts, can fundamentally at a neurobiological level change your brain and your body, and make you feel reconnected to a sense of self that I felt that I had lost a long time ago. At that 19-year-old who saw the girl behind me do the headstand, I literally had the thought, I'm too old for that. And it was a really deep belief. And if you're listening to this and you're like, Anna, you could take my age and divide it by 19 multiple times, that's kind of the point, right? Like, I realized we constantly had this feeling that we missed the boat. That if we were just had started earlier, if we just were a little bit different. I realized that I used to really define myself as nouns. Like, I am a singer, I am a student, I am, and I came to realize through yoga that it's much more realistic to describe ourselves as verbs. I am singing, I am studying, I'm studying right now, I am using my body, or I'm resting my body, right? And I think, to me, the experience I had through yoga, especially being a skeptic, being like, I'm never ever going to try that, it completely changed me, and it changed the trajectory of my life in a way that, if you would have asked me, you know, 15 years ago, do you think you'd ever A, be the CEO of a company, B, have that company be a wellness company, I would have laughed and laughed and laughed and said, I'll see you when I'm on stage at, the Met. But yeah, I mean, that was a very transformative period of my life. And I think what's so interesting about that now is I look at everything like a yoga practice. Like, if you are willing to get on your mat and suck at anything, right? Look at the girl behind you doing the headstand and laugh audibly. And instead of telling yourself, I can't do that, I missed the boat, telling yourself, oh, look at that, I'm a beginner again. That, to me, is one of the secrets of life that I find to be really motivating and inspiring.
There were so many amazing nuggets in that. I could go so many directions. What stood out for me? Oh, a couple things, but one, when you talked about like the stories that you tell yourself. So I know, chubby kid from Central PA, fitness wasn't a part of our life or how we grew up. I had a single mom who was trying just to keep a roof over our head, right? And be there when she could. And I told myself for so long, I'm not an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think, God, what like a disservice I was doing to myself, because as you know, science has shown 20 minutes of moving your body, just 20 minutes, cuts depression by 36%. And so we think it's having to do the headstand in the yoga studio or do the berries boot camp and want to throw up. And if you're not doing that, then that's not right. But it could be something as simple as just putting the sneakers on and going for a walk around the block, or trying the yoga studio and showing up again. And
Absolutely.
right, instead of being paralyzed by well, I'll suck, I'm not that, I don't do that. I love how you shared that with us, the stories that you were telling yourself and the courage you had to just keep showing up.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that, what you're sharing reminds me of, and something that I'm very aware of, especially in the work that I do now, is that, you shared your mom, single mom, trying to make it work. And our environments, the culture we live in, the society we live in, the systems that we are a part of, that force our hand to make certain decisions, to keep a roof over our head, or work certain jobs, or take the extra shift, even though you're not going to sleep as well. These are real. And I think one of the things that is really important to me is helping myself and the world around me to really look at these systems and understand it doesn't have to be on us 100%, right? I love the idea that blame is looking backwards, responsibility is present moment forward. So I think a lot of the times we'll blame ourselves. We'll say, oh, I was doing myself a disservice, or I didn't figure that out for a really long time. And I prefer to look at it as, all of these things in my life and these systems and these circumstances around me landed me here. But if I was just airdropped right here into this moment today, what would I have the ability to respond to? And that's my responsibility moving forward. That's what I'm going to do for myself. And that takes this feeling of should and blame and almost punishment, like I have to exercise. And it turns it into, this is an act of self-love. Like, if I was airdropped here and none of this was my fault, how would I treat myself differently? And I think that asking that question on a daily basis is very, very difficult. It's not something that we are trained to do. but it can be such a relief and really reshape this idea of wellness, not as something that we should be doing. My favorite quote in the world is, if you should too much, you should all over yourself, and it's a huge mess, but something that we have the option to do. It's a tool in our toolkit to help us feel a way that we prefer to feel. And to me, that is a very, very powerful form of self-empowerment.
Mm, I love that. As you're talking, it makes me flash to my relationships.
Mm.
My relationship with my husband, 38, just got married, and I share that because in our world, we're like, well, if you're not married by 25 and you don't have the 2.5 kids, then you suck. So, it's everybody, to your point earlier, it's all about the journey. And I would get so mad at myself. There was a point in my life where I would think, God, Meg, like, you suck. You can't keep a relationship. Your friends are getting married. They're having the kids. Why do you keep dating these losers who don't treat you right, but you're so desperate for love? And what I had realized after he came into my life and the journey to get there was, it was all part of the journey for me to appreciate him and learn all these lessons of what I wanted, what I didn't want, how I wanted to show up in a relationship, to appreciate the good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes back to this idea of these subconscious impacts of these systems and structures that we live in, right? This idea that we've seen on television shows, in books, in movies from our parents, that you have to get married by the time, especially if you're a woman, you have to be married by the time you're in your mid 20s so that you can start having kids in your late 20s to early 30s, and you da 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 da. And all that is a really, really bad campfire story. Like, it's a story that's designed to, not designed, but has the impact of just making most of us feel like we're doing it wrong. And all it really is a story. And I think one of the things that I have come to really appreciate about life is seeking out unique stories. It's so common for people to default into certain behaviors, default into certain goals. Like, I was just speaking to a friend of mine the other day who is the chief financial officer of a health tech startup. And he was talking about, we were discussing the ideas of, if you're a mission-driven company, do you fundraise or do you try to bootstrap it so you can really drive the mission? And we came to this idea of the metaphor of individuals with their financial goals. It's like, there's so much wisdom out there. You should be opening up a 401k and doing this with your mortgage and da 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 da, because the assumption is your goal is to retire and then begin your life. But what if that's not your goal? What if you would prefer to travel now and work some extra years on the other end because you love your job, right? These are the stories, the unique stories that really add color to life. And I think deciding that that's a value, that I'm going to seek out these unique stories, which is so much of what you do in your work, Megan, seeking those out, highlighting those, amplifying those, so that we fill our minds with the idea that something that looks different is often full of richness and color and beauty, and in so many ways can be that much more enjoyable because it feels like it's ours.
Yes, your truth, right? Your truth. As you're talking about this just makes me flash back to my own journey. And I think about, there was a time in my life, and listen, I still struggle with it. You and I talked about this before we hit record, right? How, listen, we're even in the space and we can struggle with this addiction to achievement, right? But there was a time in my life when I thought, if I wasn't doing it hard, if I wasn't exhausted and collapsing on the couch on a Friday, barely able to keep my eyes open at the kitchen table at night, then I wasn't doing it right. Have you found through your journey that you've changed sort of the narrative about how you approach your days, how you approach your to-do list? Are you showing up with more intentionality with Anna infused in it versus the tasks
Such a good question. I feel that, like everything in life, this is an iterative process and
Mm,
everything's always changing. So I think that when I started my company, I really committed to intentionality every day. And I got a lot of that. I also was not making a lot of money, you know, and that was the truth because I just started, right? There wasn't a lot to do. I have a very distinct memory of sitting in a coffee shop, and it was about 1:30 in the afternoon, and I had run out of things to do that I knew to do next for this company. And I'm sitting there thinking, I wish I had more to do, because if I had more to do, I would be getting to where I want to go faster, right? And there is an urgency to that when that's how you're making money, right? But I also remember thinking, there's going to be a day, and I have arrived at that day many times over, where I'm going to wish I was back here in the coffee shop without anything to do after 1:30 p.m. So I say that to say that as I have grown this business, there was a very deep struggle and an ongoing struggle that I do feel like I'm making a lot of progress on at this point, which is this balance
mm,
between, do I push myself because I know that it's a means to an end, and I know that it's going to be getting myself to the next place that I want to go. And I know that it's not going to be forever, right? It's different than thinking I'm going to burn myself out forever because I think I should. It's saying I'm going to burn myself out right now because I'm pretty sure I'm about to hit gold, right? That is an experience I think a lot of people have. It's this idea of, I know I want to be resting more. I know that rest would be helpful, but I feel very deeply that if I just keep pushing myself a little bit harder, I can rest tomorrow. And I think that you can be 100% intentional, 100% aware that you're doing that, and still find yourself at 5:30 p.m. coming downstairs, laying down on the couch and thinking, I could probably sleep for 14 hours. And so I put out that feeling of imperfection, right? That might come across as like, the idea might be, oh, if we get it right, we can get everything done that's enough to build and bootstrap a company by ourselves and have 3 hours to take a nap and take a bubble bath every day. And what I have come to realize is that is not true, but it's about the journey of learning, what does intentionality look like when my plate is overfull? What does intentionality look like when my plate is perfectly full? What does intentionality look like when I push stuff off my plate so it's a little less full? Can intentionality take different forms in those different ways? And can intentionality be meaningful if we don't feel like we're getting it right?
mm,
And I think that the answer to all of those is yes. And that it comes down to, actually, at the where I'm currently at in my thought process of this, is that it's much more about self-compassion and relieving ourselves of the burden of control. So I think that, yes, I'm very intentional. Yes, I have very busy days. Yes, I'm still figuring it out. And I think I've gotten to the point where, instead of pushing myself to be more intentional, which can sometimes lead to forcing myself to do things in a certain way, I've kind of actually taken the gas pedal off and said, maybe this just looks like letting go a little bit more.
mm, mm. I love that. Do your best, forget the rest.
Do your best, forget the rest.
Well,
You know,
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I said that to my father the other day, who is one of my absolute favorite people in the world. And he was like, interesting. What do you think about do your best and acknowledge the rest? And I thought about that for a while, because I'm like, there's something to that, right? You don't want to forget about it. You don't want to bury your head in the sand. But I think I arrived back at forget the rest because at some point you have to let go. At some point you have to let go. And that is the scariest part. But I think that's the part that really gives that sense of freedom.
I don't know if I shared this with you, but I'm a huge believer. I know this sounds hokey and woo woo, but I'm a huge believer in the power of a word. for the year ahead. So every year I do these my intent bracelets, and my
Mm,
word this year is trust.
mm,
Trust that what is meant for you will show up for you, because it always has at this
mhm,
point. Like, you don't need to control every iota of every day, Meg, and everybody else's response, right? Like, you need to let go and trust. And I read something the other day that says, like, when you trust and when you back that pedal off a little bit, which is hard to do, but it gives you this sort of acknowledgement that these negativities, these stories that you've been telling yourself, they start to come forward so you can truly heal them.
mhm. Absolutely. I resonate with that so much. I think that the fear of letting go is that we know that things are going to fall apart.
Mhm.
But if we have the courage to, and and I think it's not just about courage, right? Courage is acting in the face of fear, but it's also, do we have the emotional bandwidth
Mhm.
to allow ourselves to let things fall apart, knowing, and I think this is what would get us through a moment like that, knowing that at the end of the day, this person might leave your life, or this client might decide they don't want to do something with you anymore. But what you're going to be left with is a life that's in much more of a state of homeostasis, right? Of
Mm.
self balancing, where we don't have to effort so hard to keep that life in order. And the fear of the immediate fallout from allowing life to normalize and equalize and balance by itself, that is really scary. And sometimes we can feel like, I can't afford that, right? And sometimes I do believe that might be true. But I think it's very much worth asking ourselves, am I just afraid of the immediate consequence? And if so, what would it look like to know that letting go is actually the effect that happens when we begin to set truer, more in boundaries that have more integrity to what we need, right? So I think I agree with you 100%. It's when we set these boundaries, things do fall apart. But when they come back together, they're built around boundaries that feel better for us. And that is a form of healing.
Mm. Yeah. I would love your take on this. We are a huge micro step community. Yeah,
Mm,
I feel in our world we want to put blanket terms on everything. So
mm,
self-care, get the bubble bath, like
mhm,
we never really want to dig deep
mm,
into what the issue is, because it's yucky and it's muddy and it's hard.
mm,
So there's these little micro steps that we can
mm,
do every day to start to show up and make this commitment to ourselves. So for our listeners that are like, Anna Meg, this is great. I love the fact you're letting go, but I can't do that. Uh,
mhm.
what is one micro step that they could infuse in their life tomorrow that would begin this process of letting go?
Mm. Okay, so this is one that you could do right now. It's taking a piece of paper and writing down all of the reasons why you want to let go, what that would bring you, what that would feel like. And then draw a line down the center of that piece of paper. And on the other side of the piece of paper, write down all the reasons why you don't want to let go.
Mm.
I think my micro step is simply acknowledging that both might be true for you right now. I think we waste and we spend and we exhaust ourselves with so much emotional energy trying to figure out which one is correct.
Mm.
And I think a huge part of self-care and self-love is simply being able to sit down and saying, oh, okay, maybe both are true. And I think once we accept that, we can actually start to address the reality that we might be in conflict with ourselves. We might feel both things, and that's okay. And that's something that I think on a global level, humans are very uncomfortable with, this dichotomy when two things are true at the same time. I'm happy in my relationship and I want something or need something to fundamentally change, right? I want to go for this crazy cool career goal, and I am really afraid that I can't sustain my mortgage if I do that. I want to have kids, but I want to center my career. It's not that you feel one or the other of those things. It's that your lived experience is both of those things. And that is really important.
Mm, mm. I about had a church praise be moment. It took everything in me not to rise up like Teresa Judice from the Real Housewives when she flips the table. That is so true because that's what we're never taught.
Yeah.
That listen, especially females, like when you were talking about the children piece, like that really
Mm-hmm.
hit me because at 38, it's being breathed down my back,
Mm-hmm.
right? That if I don't have a baby tomorrow, that it'll never happen for me. And that then I need to sacrifice my career and everything I've done. Where no, you can have both. It's not one or the other. And that's where we really get stuck because you want to put yourself in this one lane that we've been culturalized when you really everything's figure outable. You can have both, you can do both things. I love how you put that.
I totally agree, especially with the having kids. And I think one additional layer I would add to that is that we often think about it as having both. And that kind of implies that we know what we want. We have this specific vision of what this is going to look like, right? And something that I've been really passionate about understanding in myself is that instead of thinking about having both visions of what I've always imagined coming to at the same time, I think about what would each of those visions give me on an emotional level, right? And can I find that in different ways? Or does having both look different than creating scenarios and new visions and new ideas where I'm getting the outcome that I thought I would get by having both of those things, right? So it's taking that to the next step of saying, okay, I want both of these things. Why? What would that give me? And can I give myself that today? And sometimes just that, putting that control back in today, in this feeling of I own my story, my needs, my desires, that can free us up to be even open to exploring new
Mm.
versions and new ideas, and actually end up making it more likely that we can quote unquote have the things that we want.
Oh my God, I love that because we are so quick, especially in the US, to want to put a materialistic check mark
Yeah,
next to it.
right.
So you think it's the promotion, you think it's fitting in the skinny jeans, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you think it's getting the luxury model of the car that is going to make you happy, and it never does
Right.
because you never take the time or the curiosity or the silence to really peel back the layer and ask yourself and answer, what am I looking for here?
Yeah, what do I want? That is
Mm.
a question that we are not often encouraged to ask, and we often have not been taught how to answer, right? What do I want? I always love little kids when they are like, but why? But why? But why? I
Mm.
do that all the time when I'm doing trainings or facilitation or just in my own life. It's like, okay, I want one thing right now that I want is I want to go to Hawaii with Tim, my partner. I want to go to Hawaii with Tim. Well, why do I want that? Well, I want to have this amazing experience with this person I love in this new place. Well, why do I want that? Well, it would give me a sense of fulfillment, like I'm doing new things, trying new things with this person I love. Okay, great. I want a sense of fulfillment and I want to spend time with this person that I love, maybe trying new things. Can I do that here today? Oh my gosh, that doesn't mean I don't want to go to Hawaii, but it also means that that feeling that I want from that, I can actually give myself today. And what a joyful realization, that we can do that in ways that maybe we didn't even think about before.
Mm. Oh my God, Anna, I could have you on here for hours. Yeah, another praise be moment because as you're talking, I'm flashing to at the age of I think I was just turning 38. I was navigating through what this next iteration of my career looked like. 15 years in sales, but I had the inner gut feeling that I was just meant for more. But it was scary
Mhm.
because sales was my hat. It's what I knew, right? This
Yeah.
hospitality hat. And I had a girlfriend of mine talk about keeping things on surface level and never really peeling back the layers. I had a whole layout of why I was going to go after a different sales job in maybe another industry. So I'm laying it all out to her, type A, I have the whole thing typed out, my whole why. And she stops me. She's from Boston, and I love this. She stops me and says to me, knock it the hell off. What do you want?
Yes.
And I thought to myself, Anna, at that point, I was just turning 38, I have never asked myself that question
Yep.
up until that point. My life was whatever would make you happy.
Mm. Mm. Right. Absolutely. And that's such a common feeling, right? This realization of, huh, it's maybe I've never asked myself, right, what I want. That reminds me of, I had a student one time in a training come up to me after it was a mindfulness training, and she was in her mid 50s, and she came up to me and she goes, "This might sound so strange, but I don't think I ever realized that I could consciously take a breath." She's like,
Mm,
"I don't think I've ever done that." And that is one of the things I think is so beautiful about a yoga practice, is that it's this physical embodiment of these emotional experiences that we have, right? Not ever physically taking a moment to take a breath and feel how that feels, the temperature, the feeling in your body. That is a realization that you don't know. You are not intimately acquainted with the fundamental feeling and life-giving experience of your body, right? And that rings so true with the same question of what do I want? It's like, oh my gosh, it feels obvious that I would have asked myself that. Maybe I even assumed that I've asked myself that, just like I've assumed I've taken a deep breath before, right? But when you really
yes.
sit down and do it, it's like, whoa, this is so different. And to me, that really rings true to this idea of, we're not nouns, right? In this story that you're sharing, like, you're thinking to yourself, I'm a salesperson. I am a people person. I am this, I am that. Instead of, what I've been doing for the last 15 years is selling. What I've been doing for the last 15 years is growing my network. But when we
Mm,
turn those into verbs, we start to see how these things that we're doing, these skills we have, apply to a million different jobs, parts of our life, identities that we're passionate about, hobbies that we haven't yet
mm.
taken up. These are our skills, and these are things that we can apply all over the map. So I just really resonate with that feeling of, like, asking, what are you doing? And taking a step back and saying, oh, right, I kept trying to fit myself into this particular box, when in reality, what I'm realizing is these skills I have, I could turn around and put them on any shelf that I want, not just the shelf that I've been putting them on for the last X number of years.
And for our listener who is like, holy shit, yeah, I've never asked myself what I want. What is one thing that they could do again tomorrow to help navigate and lean into that easy gut feeling that
Yeah.
tells them that they were meant for more?
Mm. So that's such a good question. I mean, I think you could give a million answers to that question, but something that comes up just from the conversation that we've had, and this idea of starting to think about these experiences that we've, kind of categorized as negative, as
Mm,
actually maybe helpful information, right? Just starting to notice when you start to get that feeling of, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm so tired, I don't want to do this thing, taking a moment and saying to yourself, okay, what is my body trying to tell me? Our bodies are so smart. They're really, really, I mean, it's such an interesting combination of so smart, and they're using a dull instrument of communication, right? It's just like fatigue or stress, right? All they have is for feedback is this emotion. But taking that minute to sit with that emotion, and instead of thinking, this emotion is separate from me, this emotion is bad, I shouldn't feel this emotion, right? Which we're taught on so many levels. Sitting with that for a moment and saying, oh, okay, interesting. what is this emotion trying to tell me? And
Mm.
that might not work the first time you do it. You might be like, it's trying to tell me that I want to throw my coffee cup through the window, right? And that's okay, right? That's the practice. That's that moment of sitting and thinking. But if we do that enough times, we get to the point where, and this can be very scary, right? Because it comes back to the idea of maybe realizing that we need to let things fall apart a little bit. We start to realize, oh, I need rest. That's what my body is exhausted. It's telling me I need rest. I'm feeling angry with this person because my body is telling me I need to set a different boundary. I'm feeling like I don't want to go out to dinner with this person because my body is telling me this isn't serving me. I need something different, right? Just starting to become friends with that part of your body that might not always be doing the best job, might sometimes feel like it's the instigator of the negative emotions, but that part of you that's trying to say, hey, pay attention to me, that part of you is not something that you have to be afraid of for the rest of your life. That part of you can actually become a very wise voice that protects the things that are the most important to you.
I love that. I love that because I think that at least in my own life, when you have the power to, when you recognize it, right? When you give yourself the time, the silence, the curiosity, and you recognize it and you lean into it, then you have the power to change it. And then that
Mhm.
puts you in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think self-awareness, right, is at the foundation of so many important skills in our life. Self-awareness is what helps us manage stress. Self-awareness is what helps us navigate conflict. Self-awareness is what helps us to give ourselves self-compassion and
Mm,
self-kindness. It begins with awareness. And awareness is not noticing that things are good or noticing things and feeling good about them. Self-awareness, my favorite definition of mindfulness is by James Baraz, who wrote the book Awakening Joy. And he says, mindfulness is being aware of what is happening right now without wishing it were different.
mhm.
It's being with the pleasant without holding on to it when it changes, which it will, and being with the unpleasant without fearing that it's always going to be this way, which it won't.
Yes, yes. God, I love that. I
It's
feel
my
like I'm in a
favorite
church. I feel
mindfulness
like I'm in a
quote.
church moment here. I'm sitting in the front pew, like, yeah, yeah. I want to give some airtime to your company because I love the work that you're doing. I think it is so important, as we talked about earlier. Let the mask down. Like we've been culturalized in our world to not let the boss know you don't have it all together, right? Like at all cost, act like you can do the things, be the things, even if you're sacrificing yourself. And your company motto, which I love, happy people do great things.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do.
Happy people do great things came out of a deep conversation in the beginning of the company. I think it was maybe 2017. And I was working with somebody on our team at the time who was an amazing thought partner. And he and I were talking about how do we capture in a few words this idea that caring for people and creating more ethical, human-centered workplaces
Mm,
is good for everybody. But do that in a way that no matter who is reading it, you have an emotion about it and you feel connected to it. And that's where this idea of happy people do great things came up. It's that feeling of, I know that when I feel like I can take a break, I feel like I can breathe, I feel supported, I feel encouraged, even in the moments of stress, I am motivated to act, right? We've all had the job where we just don't care, where
mm-hmm.
we just, our cynicism has gotten so high that we just cannot bring ourselves to give one more hoot about what we have to do, even if we know it's important, even if we believed in it or wanted it in the past. And so I think the experience of reading or hearing happy people do great things is that lived experience of, yeah, I know that when I'm not being cared for, when I do not have an environment where I can care for myself, you're not going to get the best out of me on any level. I also like to touch on, when we talk about this idea of happy people do great things, that this is not an ode to toxic positivity, right? Happy people do great things does not mean if you just meditate for enough hours a day and eat kale, that you'll never experience stress again, and that'll make you healed and fixed and you'll be a perfect person, right? That could not be farther from the experience that we're trying to create in workplaces. The reality of happiness is that it looks different for everyone. Sean Aker, who's a Harvard researcher, he wrote the book, The Happiness Advantage, which if you're interested in how happiness affects workplace productivity, that was like my first organizational development, happiness, positive psychology Bible. I love that book. It's so fascinating. It's got so much interesting research. But he says that happiness is not the belief that everything is great. Happiness is the joy we feel striving towards our potential. And so that's what we strive to do at our company. On the Go-Go, we entered the corporate wellness space somewhat by accident, right? I told you the story of how I began teaching yoga and getting into yoga. And the reality was I was working at a music festival company that, as well-intentioned as it was, it had a very toxic work culture and people were stressed all the time. And I was like, I can't do this. I cannot live the rest of my life this way. I want to start a company where we're bringing these conversations, Megan, like we're having today, to people in a way that feels relatable to them, in a way that is research backed, in a way that doesn't feel woo woo or intangible. It feels very practical and addresses the feelings and experiences that they have across the spectrum of emotion. And so there I was, 22, driving in my little orange Prius, bringing yoga to people. And over time, we got into the corporate wellness space because companies would call and they'd say, we want to do a yoga class, we want to do a mindfulness class. And I came to understand this industry and realize that there was not a company out there that had a corporate wellness focus that was focused on helping people feel happy and safe and fulfilled and connected and building these skills for themselves to make themselves happier, healthier people, and in turn, improving the outcomes for the organization. Everything out there was, let's get Brenda from accounting, who's stressed and has 3 kids at home that are all struggling to eat more carrots because we don't want to pay for her health insurance anymore, right? That doesn't work. And we can see that in the world now. People are rejecting that. It actually makes us angry when we feel like an organization is saying, we're giving you a wellness program because we don't want to pay for your pharmaceuticals anymore, right? Screw that. Leave that. And that if you are doing that, if that's the way that your company is handling corporate wellness, you don't have a wellness program, right? What On the Go-Go does is we help companies build wellness programs that are designed to enhance the human experience. Companies spend millions of dollars pouring money into enhancing their client experience because they know that if a client has a positive experience, they're going to come back, they're going to pay more, they're going to be better clients. The same thing is true for your employees. Your employees are consumers of your brand in a very different way, and arguably in some ways a more meaningful way, because they're creating the things that you are selling and bringing into this world. So we build employee experience centered wellness programs. We do workshops and we specialize in working with remote and distributed teams, which has been like a real journey during this pandemic time, but really amazing to build these experiences together that help people come together and understand each other better around emotional well-being, teamwork, social emotional connection, leadership, even just doing cooking classes or having a social experience. We build wellness challenges that kind of take the place of these old weight loss challenges and step challenges. It's like, we get it, Brett, you run 10 miles before everybody else is awake. You're always going to win. I'm never going to compete. It makes me feel like I can't do wellness, right? And instead we give people points for FaceTiming a loved one or writing down 3 goals that we have for ourselves or asking ourselves, what do I want today, right? And then we have used technology to kind of pull all of this together. So we try to save time for leadership teams and all of that. All that to say, we are trying to build a mission-driven organization that changes the way that people work for the better.
I love that. Who would have known when that vocal cord injury
Right.
happened that here you would be trailblazing corporate America, my girl?
Yeah, well, I think about it, it's all a yoga practice. It's like if you get on your yoga mat and you're like, today I'm going to bust out a bird of paradise pose. And if you don't know what that looks like, do a quick Google search. It's crazy, right? You got your like leg up in the sky, your arms all wrapped around your body. If you get on your yoga mat for the first time and you say, I'm doing the bird of paradise pose or I'm not a yogi, you're going to have a bad time, right? Like you're going to pull your hamstring, you're going to feel like a failure. If you just get on your yoga mat and you say, I'm here to breathe today. And that's what you do. Like, that's what drives you forward. And that's how I think about this company. It's like, you don't have to know how to begin you don't have to know how to begin or how to end in order to get started. You just have to be willing to let things fall apart a little bit and own that being a beginner means you might feel like you're sucking at it a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's actually has come to be one of my favorite parts of the process.
That's great. I want to ask you about, I'm so curious to your take on this. You and I had talked about this before we hit record. You're talking to someone who had tied my value, my contribution to the world for so long to achieving.
Mm-hmm.
So closing the deal, fixing the thing, getting the job done. And what it created was this addiction to it. I was always craving it. It wasn't enough. And it really squeezed the joy out of life. And as you've built this movement, as you've built this community, as you're running this company, as you're doing all of the things, how do you keep yourself from falling into that trap, which is so easy to do? That when I get this company here, when I do this, then I'm successful.
It's a great question. And the answer is I don't keep myself from falling into it. I have just gotten pretty good over time with practice of noticing when I've fallen into it, it's interesting, this idea of an addiction to achievement, right? Because we think about our brain's reward system, right? Where our brain learns that when we do something new or do something, if we achieve the sale and we get all this positive recognition, our brain learns, when I do that thing, I'm going to give myself a reward. I'm going to get a reward. And so we're driven towards that, repeating that action. And when that action costs us a lot of physical energy, a lot of emotional energy, a lot of time, but that's what we've trained our brain is the only way that we can get reward. Of course, we're going to go there. It's the same reason why it is virtually impossible for me not to eat an Oreo if I see it. Right?
Oh, God,
because my brain has learned, right? My brain has learned, that's going to make me feel good. Right? So I think that the trick is, number one, realizing it's not a character flaw if you fall into that, because it couldn't be more normal. And number two, intentionally looking around for, what are other things that make me joyful? And how can I put those in my way, in my path, so that I'm training my brain, oh, that's another way I can feel joyful. Oh, that's another way I can feel joyful. And so you're not getting rid of achievement, right? Achievement is a beautiful part of life, but you are diversifying the things that make you feel good so that achievement becomes part of that, but also rest can be part of that, or taking a vacation can be part of that, or failing at something can be part of that, right? I think that, that might sound silly at first, but go pick up a hobby that you're really bad at and let your only goal be to be bad at it, right? Those types of things can actually rewire our brain in a way that just changes how we feel. And like I said, my favorite quote, if you should too much, you'll should all over yourself, and it's a huge mess. So it's not that you should do these things. It's not that you should, or you have to fix your achievement, tendencies. It's simply that you have the freedom to do that And if the only reason you're going to do it is because it feels good, that's the perfect reason.
Yes. And to your point earlier, talk about a full circle moment, really peeling back the layers and asking yourself, what emotion am I looking for?
Mhm.
Because there's many ways to get it outside of just achieving the thing.
Absolutely.
My friend, I can't believe this time with you has come to an end. You are so beautiful, so amazing, such a good-hearted, authentic, vulnerable, real human being, and I hope you see the beautiful human that I do. Our listeners, I'm sure, are thinking to themselves, where can we get more of Anna? Where? Where can we get more of you?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Megan. I think what you're doing here is just tremendous. And this has been such a joyful start to my Friday. So I really appreciate you. And I'm so excited to meet any of you guys that are listening to this right now. You can find me all over the place. Please uh, check out Instagram. I'm at Anna Greenwald _ or at On the Goga. And on LinkedIn, you can just search me and follow me. I'm Anna Greenwald. And either one of those places are a great way to connect. If you want to learn more about On the Goga, just go to www.onthegoga.com. And you can check out all sorts of things from job openings to products and services to my TED Talk called Why Wellness Sucks, which if you enjoyed this conversation, you would probably get a kick out of. But I would be so thrilled to meet you guys and be a deeper part of this community that you're building, Megan.
Thank you, Anna. And I'm going to link everything in the show notes, guys, so you can just click and get right to all of Anna's amazingness. And do watch the TED Talk. It was one of the first things I went to on the website. And I believe before you even said hello on our first call, I was like, your TED Talk was amazing.
Thank you so much.
I love you, babe. You're an amazing human. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the work you do. It's so meaningful.